in private members' time tomorrow. It'll be voted on tomorrow evening. The core point of the bill is that it seeks to reduce rents to 25% of household income, net income. I would do that immediately for new builds, and it would do it within the space of 12 months for existing tenancies. The need for legislation such as this is urgent. More than 1/3 of renters are now paying 50% or more of their net income on rent, according to Threshold. According to the Irish Congress of Trade Unions, rents here are 78% above the EU average. And it's 3 years now since Ireland topped the World League table for percentage of household income, net income, that is spent on rent, beating Portugal and Switzerland and other countries into the lower places. Rents continue to rise, and it is causing huge stress as people ask, will I be able to afford to pay the rent? What happens to me if I don't? Might I be homeless? It's causing poverty as people say, what do I cut back on? Do I have to cut back on food? Do I have to cut back on food for my family? It's causing young people to be forced to stay at home until they're no longer really young, well into their 30s. 10 years ago, the average age for leaving home was 19. Now it's 28. And it is a key factor in the current wave of youth emigration. Won't be able to afford to buy, can't afford to rent, or if I do afford to rent, spending a fortune, half my wages, dead money. So this is a big issue. It's a huge issue, and we want to address it tomorrow with this proposal. That's it. Okay.
So I might take questions at the end if everyone's okay with that.
Okay, I want to start with the issue of Niall Collins. It's now 6 days since the Ditch online news site printed a story with very, very serious allegations about Niall Collins, potentially an allegation of criminal behaviour in terms of a breach of the Local Government Act, very certainly a breach of the Code of Ethics for councillors. Until last night, Niall Collins had taken a vow of silence in relation to this. He didn't deny it, he didn't say anything about it, and it took me writing on behalf of People Before Profit to the Business Committee, seeking a statement by Niall Collins in the Dáil and questions and answers from TDs to then elicit a statement from Niall Collins. What is interesting about the statement from Niall Collins is that he does not dispute or deny a single fact outlined by the Ditch newspaper, the Ditch online news site. Instead, what he's saying is, at the time that the land sale to his wife took place, he was no longer on the council. But that was never the issue. That was alleged by the Ditch website. What is alleged by the Ditch website is that in December 2006, his wife wrote to the council expressing an interest in buying the site. In January 2007, the management of the council brought it to the councillors to say, we've had expressions of interest, but apparently there was only one expression of interest, namely Niall Collins' wife, was brought to the council. And at that point in time, Niall Collins did not recuse himself, did not declare a conflict of interest, and participated in the decision to open the process to put the land up for sale, which was subsequently bought by his wife. On the face of it, that is a very, very clear breach of the Code of Conduct for councillors, and I think certainly arguably a breach of the Local Government Act. And I think so. Niall Collins' statement yesterday does nothing to get rid of the cloud of suspicion over him and does nothing to dispute the allegations. So our request for a statement by Niall Collins in the Dáil and questions and answers remains. We'll be calling a vote on the order of business if it isn't agreed in relation to that. And for me, the fundamental question is, unless Niall Collins is able to show that he did not know that his wife was someone who had expressed an interest in buying the land, if he isn't able to show that, and he hasn't made that case yet, I just don't think how it's tenable for him to continue as a minister, and I don't see how the Taoiseach, the Taoiseach, Eamon Ryan, could stand over him continuing, having behaved in such a way as a councillor. Secondly, maybe just briefly, because I presume there'll be questions about it, obviously there was a protest by 10 or 11 far-right protesters outside my house last night, overwhelmingly men, a number of them covering their faces. We obviously want to condemn that protest outside my family home. We were literally preparing to give Juniper, our baby, a bath, and then you have this protest of people outside. I think what I would say to them is that, come and protest outside the Dáil. Do not be targeting my family home or anyone else's family home. I think it's obviously completely wrong and inappropriate. I would also make a political point about this. These people, the far right, who are protesting against refugees coming in here, who are against, young people having access to any books that deal positively with LGBTQ identities and so on, these people present themselves as being in some way anti-establishment. But look at who they spend their time attacking. There's an incident with Mick Barry you might speak about, I think, yesterday. Obviously a protest at my home yesterday. In reality, they are attacking and focus their criticism on those who are most opposed to the government. The TD who raised the issue of Niall Collins, who got it on the agenda, was me, and then last night you have an issue of corruption in government being raised, and so on. The far right are targeting me. They were giving out leaflets last night opposing our right to housing bill, which would make it difficult, or more difficult potentially, for landlords to be able to evict people, would enable the government to be able to introduce proper rent controls. So the truth is that they are acting as unwitting agents, presumably unwitting in the most cases, of the real establishment in this country, of the landlord class in this country. They're doing their dirty work, and they're not anti-establishment in the slightest, and anybody who has illusions in them should have a check about the kind of behaviour they're involved in and about who they really represent.
So I think it's clear that the Minister for Justice is bringing the review of the Termination of Pregnancy Act to the Cabinet this morning, and we will be challenging the Taoiseach about his statement later on when he said that he's uncomfortable with this. And just to clarify, it isn't about how any deputy or senator or anybody else feels in relation to their comfort or discomfort with it. The review is very thorough, carried out by professionals who looked at the lived experience of the crisis pregnancy and legislation around it since it was introduced, and they looked at international best practice, and we will see the publication of that hopefully tomorrow, and the details will be clear. So we will be challenging the government here to publish it, and to obviously it'll go to the Health Committee, and we will be looking for amendments to the Act in line with the recommendations of this very thorough review, and those recommendations should be in line with the lived experience, as I said, of pregnant people in this country. We've had 700 had to leave Ireland since repeal, and the one clear thing that people in this country wanted to see was to see us stop exporting this as an issue for women and pregnant people in this country. So we have to keep that in mind and remind them that it's not about how they feel, about how they canvassed or how they campaigned, but rather about what this review is saying to us. I mean, many of us fought hard against a lot of the measures that are in the Act. Delighted we won repeal, delighted that we have abortion here in Ireland, but there are problems, and this review shows you what the problems and the limitations are. And indeed, it was having that review was something that we insisted had to go into the legislation, and that it was to take place within 3 years of the Act being passed, and it's actually quite considerably longer than that. So this will be the big issue I'll be raising with the Taoiseach today.
And finally, just a quick word about the government's new proposals on housing. And what we want to say is that the government's mooted new proposals are in fact just a rehashed, recycled version of the same failed policies and failed approach of giving handouts and subsidies to private developers, which has failed catastrophically, and has actually largely generated the housing crisis that we now face. The suggestion, for example, of dropping the development levies that were paid by private developers is in effect a rehash of the LEHAF funding scheme, if people remember that one, where the state paid for infrastructure for private developers, initially supposedly to deliver affordable housing. That was quickly changed, so no affordable housing was actually delivered, and it just became yet another subsidy for profit-driven private developers. And that's what we have with the government's new proposals: more subsidies, more handouts for private developers, and a continuation of the failed policy of depending on private developers and speculators to solve the housing crisis. What we actually need is for the government to use the huge budget surplus that they have to dramatically increase the delivery of public and affordable housing on public land, and to use that subsidy also to buy up newly completed developments which currently would come on the market at totally unaffordable levels. They should be bought. Vulture funds should be pushed out of the housing sector so that that new housing, all of it, comes on stream as affordable housing. And of course the introduction of rent controls as proposed with the rent reductions bill that we are introducing tomorrow. So we will be calling out really just the shocking addiction of the government to a failed housing strategy which is all about supporting private developers rather than actually taking their own responsibility to deliver public and affordable housing.
Will you be making a SIP or criminal complaint about Niall Collins? And secondly, how are you and how are your family after last night?
So in relation to Niall Collins, I think let's see. Hopefully we get answers from Niall Collins. The question of a SIPO complaint is a little bit complicated because he was obviously a councillor at the time when he did it, and before you go to SIPO you're meant to go to the council to complain, the ethics officer of the council. However, in effect, legally the council that he was a member of no longer exists, so I'm not sure if you can jump over that step and go straight to SIPO. So certainly that's something that I'm exploring. Ideally we'll get to hear some answers and then we'll have a clearer picture to be able to make a complaint. But if, for example, that's blocked, if we don't hear anything, well then certainly I would explore that this week. I'm fine. Jess, my partner, is fine. Juniper, our baby, is fine. Obviously it's upsetting to have people come outside your home. We want your home to be a safe place. It's a thing that we always say, when we're fighting for people to have the right to secure housing that they're not going to be evicted from, pay normal rent on and so on, that they can afford. How important it is to have a home as a kind of safe place, and obviously having people like that outside your home, that isn't a nice experience. But at the same time, we're not going to be intimidated, we're not going to be deterred. We're going to be focusing this week on fighting for a bill to reduce rents for renters. We stand on the side of ordinary people in this country.
Paul, just regardless of whether you get time in the dawn later on for questions and answers, the facts as you know and as they stand, just to reiterate, you think it's enough for him to say he should stand down now, and if he doesn't, for the three leaders of government to stand down? The only circumstance in which there is an explanation which means his position is tenable is that he is able to say, when in January 2007 I participated in a decision to put land up for sale, I did not know that my wife had expressed an interest to the council in buying it. That's the only possible explanation. Obviously such an explanation would stretch credulity. It wouldn't appear to be very likely that would be the case. It isn't the argument that he's made so far. But if he can make that case and prove it in some way, I think that's the only way. But apart from that, I think it's open and shut. I mean, it seems to be the case, unless he denies it, that he knew his wife was interested in buying this land. He nonetheless participated in the decision to put the land up for sale. He didn't tell the other councillors about this conflict of interest. He didn't recuse himself from the vote. I don't see how someone like that can continue as a minister.
Anyone else?
Sorry, Deputy Smith. With regards to the abortion review, do you understand that a lot of people voted to repeal the aid back when they had the referendum because they were under the assumption that there would be certain controls in place, and now they made the change, maybe they feel that they were misled or something?
Well, I understand that there were certain proposals put before the people, not the full legislation, in advance of the repeal vote, and that ministers did say there'd be certain safeguards. But the point here is to say that this was the type of legislation we got. We didn't all agree with it. There was quite a chunk of the opposition who voted against, for example, the 3-day wait. We hammered it out at committee. We didn't win that measure. There was quite a lot of us who really campaigned hard against the criminalisation of abortion providers and people seeking abortion, and the criminalisation of the providers of abortion has remained intact, with a 14-year sentence potentially carrying with it. So we now have a professional grouping selected by the department, by the government, to go and look at how has it been for crisis pregnancy and women in this country since the legislation was brought in, and this is what they're coming back with, and they are recommending the 3-day limit not be compulsory but rather recommended by professionals to people who are in a crisis pregnancy. They are recommending the decriminalisation of abortion for abortion providers. They are recommending reviewing the 12-week limit, and they are recommending changes to the legislation around fatal fetal anomaly. Breed Smith's not recommending it alone. Breed Smith did at the time, along with many others, but now we have this professional independent group saying to the government and to the minister, this needs changes in line with international best practice and the lived experience of people with crisis pregnancy in this country over the last 3 years.
Is the question really not about one of democratic legitimacy, which I guess the point Leo and Niall and others are making within government is that if you go too far, that it's not only that people maybe feel hurt because they voted on something on very specific grounds, but that actually it could give the basis or a platform for a backlash to the existing rights that that already exist for women post PV.
See,
is that not the inherent tension?
Well, I mean,
care versus the democratic legitimacy.
Well, you may claim that. The Taoiseach may claim that. Everybody else in the government may claim that that's why people voted to repeal. But how do we prove that the majority of people who vote for repeal had in mind, oh yeah, the 3-day limit, oh yeah, the safeguards, rather than, oh yeah, women at this stage in Irish society should have the right to make their own choices, and I don't want to see them exported anymore when there's a crisis pregnancy. And in actual fact, on the night of the vote being taken, the organisation with the camera in front of me here, RTE, did an exit poll, and that exit poll showed that the bulk of people who voted yes, repeal the 8, voted for on the basis of give women a choice, let them make their own decisions. We've no scientific way of going over that vote and saying that the bulk of people voted because they were given safeguards. And if we are making Leo Varadkar or anyone else feel uncomfortable, that's not the point. The point is that we now have professional review of the legislation based on the real lived experience and international best practice, and that is recommending something else.
And what if polling did emerge from the Irish Times or elsewhere that showed that the majority of people or a relative of people were uncomfortable with removing some of these kind of protections, as we call it?
Well, the real poll was the poll that got rid of the 8th Amendment. That was the real thing that mattered on the night. And the heads of bill or the proposals for safeguards were just that. They were not the substantial issue. The substantial issue was to end the abolition or the prohibition of abortion through the Constitution, and that's what people voted for. And now we have the lived experience of that, and that is the point we have to keep returning to and to argue about.
All good? Thanks, everyone.